We have got Mr. Quinton Klabon. Quinton, I want to get this right. You are with the Institute for Reforming Government. That correct?
Yeah, great memory. Thanks so much for having me on.
I know that you are a frequent attendee of school board meetings and also very vocal on the content of those meetings and also the output of the district. So when you found out about DPI Superintendent Jill Underly now changing these standards and even how the tests are scored, right? So it goes from a 3-digit score and they're changing the cut scores to now a 4-digit score. We won't even be able to compare students to even previous years, making it much more confusing. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a few thoughts on that. So one, you mentioned it earlier in the show. I think people knowing your history, not just your 100-year history, your 50-year history, but even just your last decade history is really important. If you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you're going. So this is the number of times we've switched how we score students on that state test, which tells you how schools are doing for your kids, how Wisconsin is doing as a state, whether if your kid moves to a different state, if they're going to be competitive in the workforce. This is how many times they've changed it. In 2014, we had this test that we've been doing for a long time. 2015, they switched it. That test stunk, so they switched it again in 2016. In 2020, there was no test because of the pandemic. In 2021, half the kids in Milwaukee and Madison and other places didn't take the test because they were still coming back from the pandemic, so there were no scores that year that were useful. And then 2024, we have a different test. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the last 10 years, we've had 5 years where the numbers don't make any sense. Half of the years, they don't make any sense. And so if we don't know how kids are doing from before the pandemic, or even from when some of your listeners were going to school, of what use are the scores? We don't know how we're actually doing for kids.
So these changes that they have made over the last 10 years, isn't that masking actual true student performance? And so these are educators now. Why would they want to mask or make it much more difficult for us to determine how well our students are doing? And I don't want to put thoughts into their mind or put words in their mouths, but if they are not providing the education that we as Wisconsin residents want our students to have, and they're not taking responsibility for it, is this a way in which they can hide their lack of performance and their lack of initiative when it comes to educating our kids?
Oh, kind of the opposite. So these tests, the kids take them at the end of the year. They don't come out until October. We won't actually find out the scores until this school year, the next school year. And so teachers don't really, they keep track of them, but they don't necessarily use them. They're taking these tests during the school year that measure where kids are. They know where kids are faulty. They know where kids are strong. And then they try to address those weaknesses and try to increase those strengths even more. And so I actually feel like it's the opposite. Like teachers know where kids are and they want that accurately represented. Who's being misled are parents. They're the ones who are checking in at the end of the year where, their child may have gotten all B's on their report card and then their state test shows up and it shows they're not succeeding. Now they can ask questions of their school. Now they can ask questions of their city, and they can maybe get their students, their children, the help that they need to succeed. It's going to be a big surprise. I can tell you, I can take this out of the nerd realm and make it really real for parents. So essentially, they lowered the standard from your kid can get into to get into a UW or a local school in Milwaukee. That was the standard. Now it's been lowered to the standard of, did your kid get a 19 on the ACT? Not saying a 19 is the worst score in the world, but it's saying you are not, if you applied to a UW, you're not going to make it. And so if that's a goal for you, you need to strive harder. Now there are going to be a whole lot of parents who want to send their kid to an HBCU, to UW Milwaukee, to a different UW, to UIC. And they're going to think that their kids are on track, and then they're going to get that rejection letter. And that's, I think, going to be the real shock. What DPI said is those old scores and those old names, blamed and shamed. It made kids feel bad about their scores. Kids don't pay attention to those scores. They care about a lot more stuff than that. What's going to be shameful is when they get that rejection letter or they get into the workplace and can't quickly do reading or math. That's when that shame is going to come through.
I'm speaking with Quinton Klabon, who is with the Institute of Reforming Government, and he was hired to develop exceptional K-12 policies. Can you talk about how the cut scores have changed, but also the labels, right? So I know one of the previous labels, and I guess they wanted to get away from negative labeling, where someone was below basic, let's say. That was one of the labels, for lack of a better term. They've changed below basic to something that sounds much more like Pollyanna-ish. Can you explain that better for us?
Sure. So back when Governor Evers was the head of education in Wisconsin, it was 4 scores. So there's minimal, which was the lowest, basic, proficient, and advanced. And it basically said, if you're in those top 2 categories, you're college or career ready. If not, we need to do some work. If you're in that lowest level, you're below grade level. So they've changed those to these. So instead of below basic, you're now developing. Instead of basic, you're approaching. Instead of proficient, you're meeting, and instead of advanced, you're advanced, which is bad English, but let's not focus on that. And also 2 of them start with the same letter, which means you can't really break it. It's really annoying. But anyway, the point is, they said, hey, if kids are at that lowest level, they're still striving for stuff. They're still developing, which I guess is in some sense of true, even if it is Pollyanna-ish. But we know that kids have fallen since the pandemic, that they may not be going up every year. They may be going down. And so if you're going from the 3rd level to the 4th level, or if you're falling behind further and further, you're developing. But yes, you're developing. You're developing skills that will not help you in the workplace or to hold a job or to keep an apartment. So developing isn't really accurate at all. You can be falling. You can be tumbling. And so I think rather than focusing on a growth mindset where there may not be one, the point should be, hey, be honest with parents about where they are. Give them all the resources that they need to succeed. It doesn't mean you're just letting them flounder, but give them the resources they need to succeed, and hopefully you'll see them fly. And we know that that's what happens in schools in Milwaukee. The highest performing schools in Milwaukee are not where the middle class kids go or the white kids go. That's actually not true. A lot of those schools are actually perform mediocre or below average. Where schools are excellent in Milwaukee is where they hold high standards for students. Maybe they don't reach those standards. It doesn't mean they tell those kids that they stink. But they hold those high standards and then do everything they can to push them to those standards. It's like having someone run ahead of you in track. If you have someone running ahead with you to keep you on pace, you're going to push yourself farther than when you're doing it by yourself. And it's the same concept here. If you hold high standards, kids are impressive, parents are impressive. More often than not, they'll meet them.
Quinton Klabon, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure talking to you. We appreciate your clarity on the subject matter. You have a good one, sir.
Be blessed.
All right. Dude breaks that stuff down in ways that I could only hope to.